Before we dive into today's powerful story, if you love first-person grandma revenge stories, tales of resilience, and inspiring comeback, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode.
They say a house can hold the echoes of your whole life. I believe that's true. This little yellow house in San Antonio, with its creaky floorboards and fading paint, has carried me through 40 years of lessons, laughter, and loneliness. Every wall hums with memories, photographs of former students, framed certificates, a dusty bookshelf full of dog-eared novels that once filled classrooms with voices eager, and sometimes not so eager, to learn. And now, all that history is treated as clutter. I am Evelyn Harper, 71 years old, once a teacher who gave her life to Roosevelt High School. These days, my family insists I am little more than an obligation. An antique rocking chair tucked in the corner, tolerated, but no longer useful. I tell myself it doesn't bother me, but truth has a way of scratching at the chest until you admit it hurts. That afternoon, the mail slid through the slot with its usual clatter. My knees protested as I bent to pick it up, the ache of arthritis reminding me that youth had long left these bones. Among the grocery coupons and utility bills, one envelope stopped me in my tracks. Thick, crisp paper. Embossed seal. Roosevelt High School's emblem staring back at me like a memory I never expected to see again. My heart stuttered. With trembling hands, I opened it. The words blurred before clearing, and there it was. An invitation to deliver the keynote address at Roosevelt High's 75th anniversary celebration. My breath caught. For a moment, I forgot the stiffness in my joints, forgot the loneliness. They remembered me. After decades of teaching, after pouring my soul into generations of teenagers, my name still meant something. Me. Evelyn Harper. I could still matter. But before the joy could settle, footsteps thundered from the kitchen. Daniel, my only son, appeared in the doorway. He glanced at the letter in my hands. His jaw tightened. "Mom," he sighed, the way one speaks to a child chasing a fantasy. "The past doesn't pay the bills. You should let these things go. Focus on today." His words struck deep, though dressed in what he'd call practicality. Before I could hide the letter, Melissa swept in behind him. My daughter-in-law moves like a blade, sharp, gleaming, slicing through everything she touches. She leaned over, snatched the paper from my fingers, and scanned it quickly. Then she laughed. "Honestly, Evelyn. Who wants to hear an old woman ramble about dusty books and chalkboards? These events are for people who still matter, not retired teachers living off their family." Her words dripped with sugar, but the poison was unmistakable. I smiled faintly, because sometimes a smile is all you can manage when the knife lands too deep for an immediate cry. Just then, Sophie and Ethan drifted into the room, both absorbed in the glow of their phones. My grandchildren, teenagers wrapped in digital armor. To them, I am background furniture. I lifted the invitation gently, hoping for a flicker of pride. "Your grandmother has been asked to give a speech at the high school," I said, my voice too soft, almost pleading. Sophie hummed without looking up. Ethan shrugged, eyes glued to his screen, and wandered back upstairs. That was all. Their indifference stung worse than Melissa's ridicule. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my journal, the same worn leather book that carries notes, quotes, and scribbles from my teaching years. From the kitchen, I heard Melissa's voice again, lilting and cruel. "Nobody wants to hear an old woman ramble," she said, laughing as though it were fact. My chest tightened. But along with the pain came something else. A slow, quiet fire. The days that followed were heavy, as though the sky above the house carried a storm meant only for me. Still, I kept the invitation tucked safely in my journal, guarding it like a fragile flame. But Melissa and Daniel had a way of intruding, even into corners meant to be mine. One afternoon, while folding laundry in the guest room, I opened a drawer that was rarely touched. My hand froze. Another envelope. The same Roosevelt High emblem. But this one was different, the seal already broken. My breath caught. It was another invitation, dated weeks earlier. They had opened it. Read it. Hidden it. As though it were nothing more than junk mail. For a long moment, I stood still, staring at my name printed boldly across the paper. It wasn't just anger I felt. It was grief. Grief that my own son and his wife believed I was better erased. That evening, we gathered around the dinner table. The smell of roast chicken filled the room, but it might as well have been smoke choking me. The clatter of cutlery, the glow of Sophie's phone screen, Ethan's bowed head, all of it felt like background noise to the theater of my humiliation. Melissa leaned back in her chair, eyes glinting. "Evelyn," she said sweetly, "you're living with us. You don't have to worry about bills or groceries. At your age, that's more than enough, don't you think? You should be grateful." The words hit harder than the laughter I'd overheard days before. Daniel set down his fork. "Mom, Melissa's right. You talk about your teaching days like they still matter. It's embarrassing. That part of your life is over. Accept it." The air seemed to drain from my lungs. I glanced at Sophie and Ethan, silently begging for one of them to defend me. To say a single word. But neither lifted their eyes from their glowing screens. Their silence was betrayal enough. I lowered my gaze to my plate. The roast chicken might as well have been ash. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed, journal open. From between its pages fell the small notes I had collected over decades, scribbled letters from students. "You made me believe I could write. You were the first teacher who ever told me I was smart. I'll never forget your class." Each note was a lantern in the darkness. Proof that I had mattered. Tears blurred my vision, but beneath the ache, something stronger stirred. Anger. Resolve. They could mock me. They could try to erase me. But they could not silence me. I clutched the intercepted letter in one hand, my journal in the other. Together, they whispered the truth. My voice still mattered. And I would prove it. That night, while the house slept, I stared at the ceiling until dawn painted the room gray. When the sun finally rose, I knew what I had to do. With trembling fingers, I lifted the old landline receiver in the hallway and dialed the number I had memorized years ago. On the third ring, a familiar voice answered. "Roosevelt High, this is Principal Martinez." I swallowed hard. "This is Evelyn Harper." A pause. Then a sudden warmth. "Mrs. Harper? My goodness, we've been hoping you would accept. The board is thrilled at the idea of you speaking. You were the backbone of this school for decades." My chest ached at his words. For the first time in years, someone saw me not as a burden, but as a pillar. "I'll be there," I whispered. "Thank you for remembering me." And with that, the fire inside me began to burn brighter. They tried to erase me. But they had only awakened me. Sleep abandoned me the night I found that hidden letter. My body lay still under the quilt, but my mind was a storm. Every cruel word, every dismissive glance from Melissa and Daniel echoed like a drumbeat in my skull. "You're living off us. Be grateful. Nobody wants to hear an old woman ramble." I stared at the ceiling until dawn painted the room with thin gray light. By morning, I had already made my decision. If my son and his wife wanted me silent, then I would write louder. That evening, after they went to bed, I crept up the narrow staircase into the attic. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust, as though the house itself were holding its breath. I pulled the chain on the old lamp, and its golden light spilled across the desk I hadn't touched in years. I laid out my journal, the intercepted invitation, and a stack of lined paper. My hands ached from arthritis, but I ignored the pain. Slowly, carefully, I began to write. At first, the words stumbled. My pen scratched across the page, pausing, retreating, trying again. The old teacher in me wanted perfection on the first draft, but perfection had never been how life worked. So I pressed on. I wrote about standing in front of restless classrooms at 30, chalk dust settling on my skirt. I wrote about how, after my husband's sudden death, teaching became my lifeline. How those bright, expectant eyes had saved me as much as I had tried to save them. I wrote about resilience. About the kind of strength that grows when life strips you down to the bone, but you keep showing up anyway. Hours passed unnoticed. When I finally set my pen down, my fingers throbbed, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. The days that followed found me sneaking up to that attic whenever the house grew quiet. Melissa thought I spent my evenings knitting, Daniel assumed I went to bed early. Neither of them cared enough to check. I would sit at that desk, lamplight glowing, and whisper the lines aloud to myself. At first, my voice trembled, thin as paper. But night after night, it grew steadier. Sometimes I would pause and take out the little silver brooch shaped like an open book, a gift from my first graduating class at Roosevelt. To anyone else, it was just a trinket. To me, it was a crown. I polished it gently with a cloth until it gleamed again, pinning it to my cardigan during rehearsals. Somehow, it reminded me that I was not speaking only for myself. I was carrying the voices of every student who had ever walked through my classroom. One afternoon, while Melissa was out and Daniel at work, I slipped into the guest room again. My fingers itched with curiosity. If they had hidden one letter, how many more were there? I opened the bottom drawer and rifled carefully through the old linens. And there it was. Another envelope. Seal broken. My name in bold letters. I sank onto the bed, the weight of betrayal pressing me down. How many times had they intercepted my chance to be seen? How many moments of recognition had been stolen because my family decided I wasn't worthy of them? Tears blurred my eyes. But when they cleared, something hardened inside me. This wasn't just about giving a speech anymore. This was about reclaiming what they had tried to bury. That night, the attic became my sanctuary. I pulled out not just letters from students, but lesson plans, old essays, even the small notes I used to jot down during late nights grading. I laughed at one memory, a boy named Marcus who wrote a poem about basketball that was so bad it was good. Another note made me cry. Mrs. Harper, you told me once that my words mattered. I think that saved me. The attic filled with ghosts of past voices, but they weren't haunting me. They were standing beside me, cheering me on. Weeks passed this way. By day, I endured Melissa's barbed comments and Daniel's weary sighs. By night, I built a speech that grew sharper, truer, stronger. One evening, as I rehearsed aloud, I stumbled over the words. Some say age diminishes worth. My tongue faltered. For a second, I saw only what Melissa saw, an old woman, shoulders bent, voice shaky. But then I straightened, gripping the podium of my imagination. I tried again. Some say age diminishes worth. But I say our stories are the foundation of every tomorrow. This time, my voice didn't waver. The turning point came on a rainy Wednesday. The sky cracked open, thunder rolling across San Antonio like drums. I was upstairs when the knock came. Opening the door, I found a young woman with a notepad tucked under her arm, rain dripping from her hair. Mrs. Harper, she asked. I'm Sophia Alvarez. I used to be your student. I heard you're giving the keynote at Roosevelt's anniversary. Her name tugged at my memory until it bloomed. Sophia. The quiet girl who once wrote an essay so powerful I told her she could change the world. She smiled, nervous but earnest. You probably don't remember, but you told me my words mattered. That moment, it saved me. I became a journalist because of you. And I'd like to help you now. If you'll let me. Her confession cracked something inside me. Tears welled as I ushered her in. Over tea, she told me about her career, her struggles, her triumphs. Then she leaned forward. Let me drive you to the event. Let me sit in the audience. You shouldn't do this alone. Her kindness lit a fire brighter than anything Melissa's cruelty had dimmed. For the first time in years, I felt not just remembered, but needed. That night, I climbed to the attic again, brooch pinned to my chest. My reflection stared back from the dusty mirror, silver hair loose around my shoulders, eyes alight with something fierce. I read my draft aloud. My words no longer quivered. They rang steady, like bells. I didn't just hear an old woman rehearsing. I heard the teacher I had once been, the woman who had silenced classrooms full of restless teenagers with nothing but the power of her voice. I pressed a hand to the mirror. They said nobody wanted to hear me, I whispered. Tomorrow, they will. From then on, every rehearsal felt less like practice and more like battle training. I laid out my best dress, beige, simple, worn only at weddings and graduations. I set the brooch beside it like armor. I was ready. Melissa didn't know. Daniel didn't know. Sophie and Ethan certainly didn't know. But Roosevelt High would know. And when I stepped onto that stage, it wouldn't just be my voice. It would be the voice of every student I had ever told, you matter. The night of the anniversary arrived like a storm I had been waiting my whole life to face. I woke before dawn, nerves already buzzing in my chest. My beige dress hung across the bedspread, its fabric trembling with every shift of light through the blinds. Beside it, my silver brooch glowed faintly, the open book design polished until it caught every glimmer. To anyone else, it was just a trinket. To me, it was a crown. I ran my fingers along its cool surface and whispered to it like an old friend, today, we rise again. By evening, Sofia Alvarez pulled up in her little blue sedan, rain still speckling its hood. She had insisted on driving me, and I was glad she had. My hands shook too much to trust a steering wheel that night. You ready, Mrs. Harper? She asked, her eyes shining as she opened the passenger door for me. I smiled faintly. I've been ready for 40 years. The drive to Roosevelt High felt both endless and fleeting. Streets I'd once traveled daily blurred past, familiar yet strange. When the school came into view, its tall brick facade glowing under strings of lights, banners flapping in the evening breeze, my breath caught. It looked almost the same as it had when I first walked through those doors as a young teacher, heart pounding, lesson plans clutched to my chest. Alive. Expectant. Waiting. The auditorium hummed with conversation. Chandeliers cast golden light across polished wood, and rows of alumni, teachers, parents, and students filled the seats. I slipped in quietly with Sophia by my side. My family was already there. I spotted them instantly. Daniel, stiff in his starched shirt. Melissa, hair styled to perfection, scanning the crowd with the hunger of someone desperate to be seen. Sophie and Ethan sat slouched in their chairs, faces still half buried in their glowing phones. They hadn't noticed me yet. My heart raced as I moved backstage, unseen, clutching my folded speech like scripture. The program began with the principal's voice echoing warmly through the microphone. Tonight, we celebrate 75 years of Roosevelt High School, 75 years of knowledge, of resilience, of community. We honor the past, the present, and the future. Names of dignitaries were read. A local businessman spoke briefly. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Then Principal Martinez's voice shifted, deeper, fuller. But tonight, our greatest honor is welcoming back someone whose dedication shaped this school for 4 decades. A woman who gave her life to teaching, who lifted countless students with her words, and whose impact is still felt today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our keynote speaker, Mrs. Evelyn Harper. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Then applause erupted. Not polite applause, thunderous applause. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, whistling. The sound struck me like sunlight after years of cold. I stepped out. My brooch gleamed under the lights. My dress swayed with each trembling step. And there they were. Daniel's jaw dropped, his face frozen in disbelief. Melissa's painted smile cracked, eyes wide with fury. Sophie lowered her phone slowly, staring at me as though she were seeing me for the first time. Ethan shifted uneasily in his seat. I did not need revenge beyond that moment. The truth itself was enough. I reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the sea of faces. Former students with graying hair. Colleagues with misty eyes. Young people who knew my name only from stories. My heart thundered, but when my voice came, it was steady. Good evening. Standing here tonight, I don't just see the history of a school. I see the history of lives, thousands of lives woven together. For 40 years, I stood in classrooms just a few steps from this stage. I taught literature, yes. But more than that, I taught resilience. I taught imagination. I taught that every voice has worth. A hush fell, broken only by the soft sound of someone dabbing at their eyes. There were days, I continued, when challenges felt insurmountable. I was a young widow, raising a son alone, working long hours for little pay. But every morning, I stood before my students and told them, your voice matters. Even when the world tells you otherwise. Even when people dismiss you. Even when they try to silence you. Your voice matters. I let the silence breathe. My eyes swept across the crowd until they landed, deliberately, on Daniel and Melissa. Their faces burned under the weight of my words. I did not name them. I did not need to. I told stories of students who had grown into doctors, writers, artists, parents, leaders. I spoke of the boy who had written about basketball, the girl who had thought her words had no power until she realized they did. With each student, I learned that teaching is not about the past, I said. It is about carrying light forward into every tomorrow. Applause burst again, softer but swelling like a tide. Somewhere in the front row, I saw a former student, now gray-haired, wipe his eyes. Another pressed a hand to her chest. The wave of validation pressed against me, filling every hollow space that had been carved out by years of silence. I closed with these words. Some may say age diminishes worth. That the past should stay hidden. But I stand before you to say, as long as we believe in our own voice, it will carry. It will reach someone. It will matter. And tonight, looking out at you all, I know, it already has. The final sentence lingered in the air like a bell. And then the room erupted. Applause thundered. People rose to their feet again, clapping until their palms must have burned. Former students surged forward, reaching for my hands, tears in their eyes. Mrs. Harper, you believed in me when no one else did. You told me my words mattered, and they still do. I wouldn't be where I am without you. Each voice landed like balm on old wounds. The years of dismissal and erasure melted under the flood of gratitude. And then, beyond the applause, I saw them again. Daniel sat stiff, clapping with hands that barely touched. His eyes slid away whenever mine met his, shame written clearly across his face. Melissa clapped too hard, smiled too wide, desperate to stitch herself into the applause so no one would notice. She pushed through the crowd toward me, her voice sugar-coated. That was so inspiring, Evelyn. We're all so proud of you. I looked into her eyes and saw the lie glinting there. This wasn't pride. It was survival. I smiled faintly. And said nothing. Sometimes silence is its own kind of judgment. It was Sophie who broke the spell. She edged closer, her phone forgotten in her hand. Her voice trembled. Grandma. I didn't know. She swallowed. I didn't know you were, like that. Her words pierced deeper than Melissa's false praise. My granddaughter, who had seen me as nothing more than a burden, was seeing me anew. I placed my hand over hers and whispered, "Now you do." Ethan lingered behind her, awkward and restless. But even his eyes had changed, softened, searching. He no longer looked at me as wallpaper. He looked at me as something else entirely. When the applause finally quieted, when the crowd began to thin, Sophia approached with her notepad, eyes shining. "Mrs. Harper," she said, embracing me quickly, "I want to interview you for the Gazette. People need to hear this, all of it. The community should know what you gave them." I nodded, my throat thick. If it helped someone believe in themselves, then yes. Her smile grew. It will. That night, as I stepped away from the stage, my brooch gleaming, my dress flowing, my heart thrumming, I realized something. I had not simply given a speech. I had reclaimed my voice. And they had listened. The ovation still echoed in my ears long after the auditorium had emptied. When I returned home that night, I laid my brooch gently on the dresser, still catching the lamplight like a tiny crown. My dress, once folded away for years, now carried the scent of applause, warm, electric, alive. I sat on the edge of my bed, too full of adrenaline to sleep. For decades, Melissa's voice had drowned out my own, whispering that I was a burden, an antique, irrelevant. But Roosevelt High had silenced her that night. And for the first time in years, the silence inside me was not empty. It was full. The very next morning, the phone began to ring. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Telemarketers, perhaps. But no. It was former students. "Mrs. Harper, I was in the audience last night. You reminded me why I became a teacher. You probably don't remember me, but I was in your class in '92. You made me believe I was more than a troublemaker. Thank you. I watched the live stream online. My daughter goes to Roosevelt now. She said your speech made her cry." Each voice lit up something inside me I thought had gone dark forever. By noon, my voicemail was full. By evening, I had received 3 bouquets of flowers, one from an old colleague, another from a former student, and a third from a stranger who'd simply signed the card, "For your courage." 2 days later, Sophia's article appeared on the front page of the San Antonio Gazette. The headline read, "Beloved teacher reclaims her voice at Roosevelt anniversary." Her words carried not just my speech but the story behind it, the years of dismissal, the silence I endured, and the truth that dignity can only be stolen if you surrender it. The piece spread quickly. Neighbors stopped me in the grocery store to shake my hand. Churchgoers greeted me with embraces and whispered blessings. Even the barista at the cafe down the street slipped me an extra cookie with my coffee and said, "That was some speech, ma'am." For years, my name had been muttered only as an afterthought in my own household. Now, it was spoken with reverence across the community. But the house was different. Melissa's smile had hardened into something brittle, her voice sharp whenever she addressed me. She no longer bothered with sugar to coat her poison. "Well," she sniffed one evening as she set down a stack of mail, "attention doesn't pay rent." Daniel was quieter. His silence pressed heavier than Melissa's barbs. He avoided my eyes at dinner, avoided conversation altogether, as though my very presence reminded him of his failure to see me clearly. But Sophie and Ethan were different. Sophie came to me first. One night, she slipped into my room quietly, her phone nowhere in sight. She sat on the edge of my bed like she had when she was small, legs swinging nervously. Grandma, she whispered, her gaze fixed on her lap. I'm sorry. I didn't understand. I didn't know how much you meant to people. I should have listened. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. It's never too late to listen, Sophie. I never wanted to be anything more than your grandmother. I just wanted you to see me. Her eyes shimmered with something new, respect. In that moment, the wall between us cracked. Ethan followed days later, though less gracefully. He shuffled into the kitchen, mumbled something about being wrong and sorry, then vanished again. But he lingered more often afterward, asking me questions, hovering near me instead of vanishing upstairs. It wasn't an apology in words, but in presence. And that was enough. One afternoon, as I sat at my desk surrounded by notes and flowers, a letter arrived from a publisher in Dallas. They had read Sophia's article. Your story is not just yours, the editor wrote. It belongs to every teacher, every student, every person who has ever been told their voice doesn't matter. We would be honored if you would consider writing a memoir. I held the letter in trembling hands, tracing the words slowly. A book. A chance to put my story into permanence. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with awe. Weeks later, the publisher arranged a small gathering at the library downtown. Former students, colleagues, and townsfolk crowded the room. Sophia introduced me, her voice full of pride as she announced the title of the book we were about to create together. A Teacher's Voice. Applause filled the library, not as thunderous as the auditorium but no less profound. When I signed the contract, the weight of the pen in my hand felt like sealing not just a book deal, but my legacy. That night, I returned home and hung the framed newspaper article above my desk. Its headline glared proudly back at me. Beside it, I pinned the brooch, silver gleaming in the lamplight like a badge of honor. I sat down, opened a blank document, and began to type the first chapter of my memoir. My fingers moved slowly but steadily. Each word carried the force of years I had once believed wasted. And I realized, silence no longer frightened me. Because I knew, finally, the world was listening. Weeks stretched into months. Drafts piled up, edits scribbled in the margins. Sophia visited often, offering encouragement, pushing me when I hesitated. Sophie began sneaking into my room, reading passages over my shoulder. Sometimes her eyes filled with tears. Sometimes she laughed at a classroom story she'd never heard. One evening she whispered, "Grandma, I want to be a teacher too." My heart swelled. The fire I had carried for so long had leapt into another generation. Melissa continued her jabs, though they grew weaker, smaller, each one more desperate than the last. One evening after another bitter comment, I finally turned to her and Daniel. My voice was calm, steady. I will not shrink myself for your comfort. If my presence embarrasses you, that is your shame to carry, not mine. Silence hung heavy. For once, Melissa had no reply. And Daniel, my son, my boy, only lowered his head, shame written across his face. Months later, my memoir was published. At the launch event, people lined up to hug me, to tell me their stories, to thank me for mine. One woman clutched my hand and said, "I was told I was too old to start over. But after reading your story, I'm going back to school." Another whispered, "Your words gave me courage to speak up in my own family." Thank you. Each story was a seed planted, blooming because I had refused to stay silent. Now, when I look at the brooch pinned to my cardigan, I no longer see just a silver trinket. I see every face in that auditorium, every voice that rose to tell me I mattered. I see Sophie's eyes alight with respect. I see Ethan's hesitant but growing admiration. I see my own reflection, no longer diminished, but whole. There was a time when I believed my voice had been buried beneath years of dismissal and cruelty. But I learned something. The truth cannot be silenced. Experience, resilience, and memory are not relics of the past, they are gifts the world still needs. If your family, your workplace, or your society ever makes you feel invisible, remember this. Your voice has power. It can inspire. It can endure. It can thunder. And when they tell you nobody wants to hear you, speak anyway. Because one day, the whole world will listen. And that was the story of Evelyn Harper, a grandmother who proved it's never too late to reclaim your voice. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel/page for more powerful first-person grandma revenge and resilience stories. Each week we share real, emotional journeys that remind us of the strength we carry, no matter our age. Hit like, drop a comment about what part inspired you most, and share this story with someone who needs encouragement today. Because when one voice rises, it reminds us all that our voices matter too.